It's 1995, and you get a new issue of Nintendo Power. This issue talks about the new Nintendo 64. This console introduced a whole new control scheme. And this isn't like the Wii motion controls, it introduced the analog stick. Now, games aren't limited to 8 directions of movement, they're limited to 360 degrees of movement. And having a console this powerful allows for full 3D games, instead of some of the pseudo 3D that SNES games had that even needed a special chip on the cartridges to achieve. The excitement of somebody playing Super Mario 64 for the first time and experiencing these new controls and the new graphics. This jump in video games was revolutionary. When the PS1 was launched, it didn't even have analog controls. This was the PS1 controller at launch. But then in 1997, the dual analog controller came out, which was quickly replaced by the dual shock controller.
So here at Activision, we're really stoked to be able to use the analog controller, especially for Apocalypse in particular. Our game involves 360 degrees of movement and firing. So with the D-pad, you can hit, pretty much anything you need. But with the analog controller, if you want to hit 22.5 degrees to shoot the guy in the corner room that's trying to take you out, all you have to do is put the controller at 22.5 degrees and you got him. And I really don't think anything can offer more control than that.
Going from the 4th console generation to the 5th console generation is, in my opinion, the biggest evolution in video games. Now let's look at the PS4 compared to the PS5. If we look at the top 20 most played PlayStation 5 games, 16 of the top 20 can also be played on the PlayStation 4. So since the majority of the games can be played on the prior generation, it makes the new generation leap seem far less impactful. Back in the day, it was exciting to see what the developers would do with the new power of the system, but now the jump to the new console seems different. In this video, we're going to look at every single console generation jump and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 for the change and innovation that they brought. So technically, if we look at console generations, the first generation is 1972 to 1980, so this is mainly the Magnavox Odyssey and just home Pong games. These consoles were so primitive that they actually had overlays that you would put on screen instead of actual graphics.
Press the special tennis game overlay into position on the television screen, and you're ready to begin an exciting, fast-paced tennis game. The horizontal knob on the left side of each player control unit allows you to move your player light in a left to right or right to left direction. The vertical knob on the right side of each player control unit lets you move your player light in an up and down direction. And the reset buttons on top of each player control unit bring the ball back into play should it happen to go off the court.
So that was surpassed by the second console generation. Generation 2 had many consoles, but we're going to be focusing on the Atari 2600 because it was by far the most popular. The Atari 2600 is what most people think about when they think of the first video game console. The Magnavox Odyssey sold only 350,000 units, while the Atari 2600 sold over 30 million units. The Atari featured a bunch of arcade ports, and a bunch of pretty solid games also. The Atari 2600 was one of the main contributors to the video game crash of 1983 though. With lack of quality control of third-party games, the market became oversaturated, and people just weren't happy with the games that they were buying. The Atari 2600 could output sound, so it could output music and sound effects. And the Magnavox arguably didn't really even have graphics in a sense. So the Atari was a huge leap forward. I feel like the Atari 2600's legacy was tainted by the video game crash of '83 a little bit, but overall it still is one of the most influential systems of all time. So overall, I'm going to give Generation 2 a 5 out of 10. Now for Generation 3, and Generation 3 is known mainly for the Nintendo Entertainment System, although it did have some competition, especially with the Sega Master System. The NES was a fantastic console with many games that hold up to this day. The NES also introduced
the Nintendo Quality Seal. The seal assures you the best games, the best graphics, the best accessories. Without the seal, it's not Nintendo.
This made it so that games had to be approved by Nintendo to be on their console. This was to ensure that all the games would be high quality, unlike with the Atari 2600. The NES had an amazing controller too. This controller popularized the D-pad, which is pretty much on every modern controller to this day. The NES also added 3 additional buttons: the B button, start, and select. Almost every game in the library utilized these extra buttons, and these extra buttons were a huge deal for the time. The NES introduced so many franchises like the Super Mario series, Mega Man, Legend of Zelda. Lots of the games hold up to this day. The NES had fantastic music, and overall I still think the NES was just an amazing console. And when you compare Gen 2 to Gen 3, it's just a world of a difference between the graphics and the music and even the gameplay in general. So I gotta give this generation leap a 9 out of 10. Now for Gen 4, which consisted of the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and the TurboGrafx 16. This was the first generation where there wasn't a clear winner. There was a big debate about which console was better, the Super Nintendo or the Genesis. I'm going to choose the Super Nintendo to represent Generation 4, although the Sega Genesis would have done a great job also. The Super Nintendo also added 4 extra buttons, 2 face buttons and 2 shoulder buttons. The shoulder buttons and 4 face buttons are now pretty much standard on every controller. The Super Nintendo had much better specs, leading to better graphics, music, and sound. This generation really seemed to perfect the 2D era. If you look at games like The Legend of Zelda or Metroid, and you look at the jump from NES to Super Nintendo, you can really see the developers use all these extra buttons and extra CPU and memory to the best of its abilities. Gen 4 was a very solid generation with a bunch of huge improvements, so overall I gotta give this one an 8 out of 10. Gen 4 to Gen 5. Gen 5 consisted of mainly the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and Sega Saturn. The PlayStation ended up selling the most with over 102 million units. One of the biggest innovations of the PlayStation is the fact that it used CD-ROMs. This meant that the games could be up to 660 megabytes in size and could have CD quality sound. This is when a system's ability to play music plateaued in video games. You could take any PlayStation 5 game soundtrack, rip it to a CD, and play that CD on a PS1. And the average person couldn't tell the difference. And the jump from Gen 4 to Gen 5 was pretty much the jump from 2D to 3D also, so the games look drastically different. Also, the PS1 pretty much perfected the controller in this generation with the DualShock controller. The same controller could theoretically be used to play a majority of the games that come out today. Overall, I think this is the biggest jump in video game history. This is the whole point of the video, is to compare it to other jumps, so this one gets a 10 out of 10. Now for Generation 6, and the PlayStation 2 absolutely demolished this generation, selling over 155 million units. Part of the reason why the PS2 was so popular was because it contained a built-in DVD player, and the DVD format meant that PS2 games could be much larger, being up to 8.5 gigabytes with a dual-layer DVD. This is a lot more than the PlayStation 1, but compared to the Nintendo 64, it's absolutely crazy how much this generation expanded the storage size. Another huge leap in this generation is that this generation made online gaming incredibly popular, especially with Xbox Live. Now, online gaming is a standard for any new console.
Plus, you get to pick your gamer tag, you know, your online identity. Mine's Dark Master. I play every game as Dark Master, and people are starting to recognize who I am.
Oh no, not Dark Blister.
Yep, I'm getting kind of a reputation for my superior skills. Anyway, this is the matchmaking screen. You can choose Quick Match, which will hook you up with any available gamer, or you can be more selective and use Optimatch.
Overall, Gen 6 did improve greatly on the graphics of Generation 5. Especially if you look at how much more powerful the consoles are, they were really able to use that real estate to make the games look much better. This was overall a fantastic generation. I gotta give this one a 7 out of 10. Now for Generation 7, which consisted of the Nintendo Wii, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. This generation is surprising because the Wii sold the most but was by far the least powerful system, even though the Wii was released last. If we look at the last 6 generations, this is the biggest gap in power that we've ever had. Nintendo is a smart company. Every other prior generation, they at least tried to compete with the other competitors. In this generation though, Nintendo didn't even try to get specs even close to the PS3 or Xbox 360, and still won the generation for sales. I think this just shows how the gaps between the generations are becoming much smaller. This strategy wouldn't have worked on any of the prior generations because all the power was really needed for every generation prior to this. Saying that though, a lot of hardcore gamers did think of the Wii as a joke, and PS3 and Xbox 360 games looked a lot better than Wii games. A lot of the most popular games of this generation were exclusive for the PS3 and Xbox 360 also, like Grand Theft Auto 4. So I'm going to use the PS3 to represent this generation because I think using the Wii would be a disservice to it. From the PS2 to the PS3, there was a huge improvement. The CPU and memory were over 10 times as powerful. And also the PS3 used a Blu-ray drive, so the games could be much larger also. This generation also was the first one with a standard wireless controllers, which is an industry standard now. And although the PS2 and the original Xbox had online, it really became popular in this generation. This generation had some fantastic looking great games like Last of Us and Grand Theft Auto 5. And the fact that a game like Grand Theft Auto 5 came out for the PS3 and is being released also for the PS5 is kind of crazy. Another thing of this generation is motion controls, which were more of a gimmick than anything. The PS3 and Xbox 360 could also do 1080p HD, so this generation was the leap to HD also. Overall, I'm going to give this generation leap a 6 out of 10. Now for Gen 8, and Gen 8 was pretty weird with Nintendo because the Wii U and Nintendo Switch are both considered to be part of Generation 8. Although it is cool that the Switch can go from handheld mode to TV mode, we're mainly going to be focusing on the PlayStation 4. This is the first time PlayStation used the same media as the prior generation, so the PS4 used Blu-rays just like the PS3. The PlayStation 4 is also 1080p like the PS3. One of the huge things for this generation was cross-platform games like Fortnite coming out. Before, Xbox players could only play with Xbox players, and PlayStation could only play with PlayStation, but mainly because of the release of Fortnite, this made it so PlayStation users could finally play with Xbox users. This generation, the biggest thing that it introduced was just better graphics with better weather systems and lighting. Saying that though, compared to the graphical improvements of the prior generation, this one seems fairly minor to me. The PS4 was definitely a huge improvement on the PlayStation 3. It's said that the CPU is 9 times faster on the PS4 and the graphics card is 5 times faster, so the console definitely was a significant improvement. Saying that though, I ought to give this generation a 4 out of 10. Now for the current generation, Generation 9, which consists of the Xbox Series and PS5. The Switch 2 will be added to this generation when it comes out, but overall the PS5 far outsold the Xbox Series. In my opinion, the main thing that Gen 9 added was just better graphics. And compared to the PS4, I don't think they are that much improved. Just the fact that the majority of the PlayStation 5 games can also be played on the PS4 is crazy, especially if you compare it to older generations where that would never happen. It is unfair for me to be judging this generation when it isn't complete yet, because games like GTA 6 could change the way that we think about Generation 9. Overall though, I'm going to give the leap from Gen 8 to Gen 9 a 1 out of 10. If you put all the generations down on a chart, I think the biggest leap was by far in Gen 5. I think the improvements in video games have definitely plateaued.